after watching the rise of the British Empire in one sitting. How a country the size of a province in our country became a world power through colonization and expansion, and known as the Empire where the sun never sets. Around 1500 AD. At that time, Britain was still a small island country in the northwest corner of the European continent. It runs on impoverished agriculture and livestock, and all of Europe had entered this crazy age of great navigation. Portugal and Spain were both greatly transferred through great voyages and overseas colonization, become the hegemon of Europe, especially Spain. They funded Columbus' crossing of the Atlantic to discover the New World and America, and then looting by force. Colonization continued to exploit the rich resources of this wild land of America. A steady stream of gold and silver, iron ore, marshmallows, and other materials are shipped back to Europe. Although the United Kingdom had a geographical advantage at that time, but the weak national strength is simply unable to bear the burden of overseas trade. And the key thing was that Spain was the dominant power in Europe. It's ahead economically. The Spanish Navy is also known as the Armada. Any country's overseas trade must cooperate with Spain. Otherwise, it will be suppressed. And the British obviously don't want to be pocketed by Spain. They smuggled and half-smuggled cheap raw materials from the Americas and shipped them back to Britain. This move clearly touches Spain's interests. Spain's maritime trade embargo against the UK. All British merchant ships will be intercepted and searched by the Armada. If it is found that the ship is carrying raw materials from the Americas, it will be detained. Queen Elizabeth I was outraged, but due to the gap between the two countries, the Queen starts to fight guerrillas. He strongly encouraged the civilian smuggling trade and sent pirates to join. During the plunder of the Spanish Armada, the notorious pirate license was issued directly to pirates by the Queen of England during this period. 1,580 years of pirate-turned Francis Drake, with the blessing of a ripped license, completed the first round-the-world voyage in human history. And during a 3-year voyage around the world, Drake plundered Spanish merchant ships and Spanish colonies in South America, even openly attacked the Spanish fleet in the port, while causing huge losses to Spain. And he turned his pirate fleet around. When Drake comes home full, merchants who previously invested in Drake achieved a hefty return of 4,700 times. Elizabeth I alone received a dividend of £163,000. That's the equivalent of 1 year of British government spending. Such a rich reward has British civilians scrambling to join the ranks of pirates. In the years that followed, although the British government was still unable to build a royal navy comparable to the Spanish Armada, but it gathered a large number of merchant ships from various European countries, pirate ship, etc. This move made the Spaniards gnash their teeth, especially by the year 1585. Britain and the Netherlands confirmed the Landsáki Treaty. Britain openly supported the Dutch resistance to the Spanish Empire. This treaty completely angered the Spaniards. The 19-year Anglo-Spanish War broke out. In 1588, the British defeated the Spanish Armada at the Battle of Gramellina. The loss shocked the whole of Spain. Fortunately, Spain was strong at that time, soon regrouped with a stronger navy, defeat the British at the Battle of Flores. Afterwards, the two navies fought many times in the Atlantic Ocean and the English Channel. The Spanish Armada is certainly a pass-through race. Majestic scale, But the British fleet was equipped with more advanced artillery. Tiny hull is also more flexible, maximize mobility in multiple battlefields. The two sides fought back and forth. The British fleet was repeatedly defeated by the Armada in 1596-1597. But the Armada encountered extreme weather during the two most crucial battles, had to retreat. This defeat was a turning point in the Anglo-Spanish War. The Armada still has a precious metals route from South America to Europe, but it could no longer stop the rise of the British-Dutch Joint Navy. In 1602, England and the Netherlands were defeated in the Battle of the Straits. The Armada once gained dominance over the English Channel and even the North Atlantic. But 2 years later, the Spanish forced the Anglo rivers to surrender through the brutal and bloody Ostend. It had been 17 years since the Anglo-Spanish War broke out. All three countries hoped to end the war as soon as possible. Return to peace. In 1604, King Philip III of Spain and King James I of England signed the Treaty of London. The 19-year Anglo-Chinese War ended. For the UK, the Anglo-Spanish naval battle was a turning point in the fortunes of the British nation. The British Empire was on the fast track to rise, especially by plundering the great wealth that colonization brought. Let Britain have enough capital to support it to complete the Industrial Revolution. But before the Industrial Revolution, the British must also reform their own rotten system. In 1688, the famous Glorious Revolution broke out in England. Britain is changing from absolute monarchy to the limitation of monarchy. The brand new body has brought vitality to the whole of the UK. The relatively relaxed social environment also provided fertile ground for the establishment of a navy and a global trade network in the future. At this time, a company left over from the British royal family has finally embarked on the warship of the new era. He is the infamous East India Company. The East India Company was a company funded by the British government. Its original business scope was limited to shipping Indian grain and other raw materials back to the UK. But with the British defeating the Armada, the rise of its maritime power, overseas colonies were being established. Almost every day, hundreds of cargo ships from all over the world enter British ports on the English Channel. The rise of overseas trade is bound to divide the cake that originally belonged to the Netherlands. The country known as the coachman on the sea started with integrity and banking. Make it bigger through overseas trade. The two countries have irreconcilable contradictions. Eventually, the Anglo-Japanese War broke out. The outcome of the war ended in a British victory. From now on, the East India Company is completely dominant. Its business scope is also gradually shifting from grain and industrial raw materials to tobacco. Opium epidemic. Especially since the mid-17th century, the Qing government in the East continued to use porcelain. The export of tea silk earns important silver foreign exchange, causing the world's silver to flow to China, especially the import of tea. Occupy half of the British Empire's overseas imports to Russia. The British Empire, in order to solve the problem of uneven import and export, banged the door of the Qing government with opium smuggling. A large amount of opium was not only read by the subjects of the Qing dynasty, it also allowed a large amount of silver to flow out to the British. After that, he launched two consecutive opium wars against China. The Qing government ceded territory twice, compensation for sky-high silver, and open trade ports. Except for the poisoning of the Qing dynasty, the British Empire was equally cruel to its colonies around the world. As early as 1607, British settlers established the Jamestown colony in Virginia, North America. The colony became a famous bridgehead for British slaves to plunder the North Dollar. In addition, the British government greatly encouraged the overseas colonization activities of British civilians, legally granting business licenses to overseas colonists, and granted a monopoly on overseas operations. This move greatly aroused the enthusiasm of the British commoners for overseas colonization. By 1623, the number of British colonists in the Americas reached over 5,000. It is dozens of times that of Spain and France, the largest colonial powers of the same period. By 1723, the number of British colonies in North America increased to 13. These 13 colonies were all located on the east coast of North America, across the Atlantic Ocean from the mainland of England. Colonies in America and India harvested a steady stream of silver and industrial raw materials for Britain, and Britain's power soared. The other European powers, led by France, were obviously unwilling to allow the UK to dominate alone. They united the colonies of North America with the resistance of the British Chambers. In 1756, the great powers fought over the ownership of the North American colonies. The war lasted for 7 years. The 7 Years' War. But there were already more than 2 million British settlers in North America. More than 90% of them are farmers with land ownership. The British government cleverly transferred the conflict between the great powers to these farmers. On the one hand, the number of British colonists was dozens of times that of other countries, and these farmers should be willing to fight for the land they can inherit. So the 7-Year War ended with a great British victory. Not only did they preserve their original colonies, it also included all the colonies of other powers in North America. At this time, Britain had almost complete control over India and North America. The dominance of one family has become the new pattern of Europe. After dominating North America, the East India Company and other private merchant ships started the infamous triangular trade. The fleet departed from the mainland of the UK, load alcohol guns, glass-bead iron pot, and other industrial products, arrived on the west bank of Africa, and traded directly with African tribes, handled by tribal beginners, with black gold and silver, diamonds and other goods in exchange for cheap wine, firearms and other industrial products. Teams full of slaves and gold and silver made their way north to North America, sold slaves to American colonists at a high price. These slaves became the cheapest tool, working 18 hours a day, work hard like a cow and a sheep. Generations will be enslaved by colonists, and merchant ships were loaded with grain from America. Cotton and other agricultural products are being shipped back to Europe. The British Empire made a lot of money from triangular trade. This wealth also became the capital and driving force of the later Industrial Revolution, enduring for 100 years of the slave trade. More than 100 million black people were trafficked to America, but only 10 million black people made it to the American continent alive. More than 90% of black slaves died during the voyage. The body was dumped directly in the Atlantic Ocean. By 1760, plunder by great voyages, the violence of the colonies, and the dirty income of the triangular trade, the British had amassed enough industrial capital. The mighty Industrial Revolution began. The Watt steam engine gradually replaced traditional handicrafts. Large-scale and efficient mechanized production has gradually become the mainstream of British industries. Britain in particular had dozens of colonies around the world, with cheap industrial raw materials, and industrial goods could be distributed directly in the colonies. So after the First Industrial Revolution, Britain has become the most powerful country in the world. By 1815, Britain successfully defeated Napoleon's First French Empire. Britain made up for its military shortcomings in this regard, became a centralized military section, the world hegemon of technology and economy. 100 years. Even though other countries in the world have completed industrialization, but it still cannot shake the unbreakable international status of the British Empire. Until 1914, the German Empire was replete with colonial distributions at the time, hoping to rip a piece of fat from the hands of established powers. One of the deadliest battles in human history began. The First World War. The British Empire was without question the victor of World War I, and divided up the German colonies in the war. Its land area directly exceeds 33 million square kilometers, 1/4 of the Earth's land area. There are British colonies in every time zone on Earth. Not only has English become a world language, it also gave the British Empire the reputation of the empire where the sun never sets. But during World War II, Britain was not only consumed by European powers in the Great War. In the post-war colonial independence movement, most of the colonies were lost. Thus began the decline of the British Empire. Now Britain is no longer the glory of the land. It has been overtaken by Japan economically for many years. Science and technology, military. Culture is even more miserable. It just inherited the victory benefits of 2 world wars, became a permanent member of the United Nations and continued to maintain its influence in international affairs. Commonly known as a shit stick,